In this video, we'll be looking at football mysteries that are still unsolved. Brazil's 7-1 humiliation showed how even the strongest footballing nation can suddenly unravel in front of the world. But before we continue to the next question, subscribe to our channel. How does the most successful World Cup nation in history completely fall apart in 18 minutes on home soil? Brazil versus Germany on the 8th of July 2014 wasn't supposed to be a mystery. It was supposed to be a classic World Cup semi-final between two footballing giants. Brazil, the five-time champions playing at home with 200 million people behind them. Germany, the methodical machine, looking for their fourth title. What happened instead defies every law of football physics. Germany scored 5 goals in 18 minutes. 4 of them came in a 6-minute stretch that will haunt Brazilian nightmares forever. The final score was 7-1, but it could have been 12-1 if Germany hadn't stopped trying. Brazilian fans were so disgusted they started cheering German passes in the second half. The home crowd gave Germany a standing ovation. But here's what nobody talks about: how does an entire team just break? Brazil weren't some amateur side getting schooled by professionals. These were world-class players who'd reached a World Cup semi-final undefeated. David Luiz had won the Champions League. Oscar was Chelsea's creative genius. Marcelo was Real Madrid's first-choice left-back. Hulk had terrorized defenses across Europe. These weren't pub players, they were elite athletes. Yet from the 11th minute, when Thomas Müller scored Germany's first goal, Brazil looked like they'd never played football before. Their defensive positioning was comical. Players were running into each other. Passes went straight to German players. It was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. The tactical breakdown was unprecedented. Brazil's midfield simply vanished. Fernandinho and Luiz Gustavo, two defensive midfielders who'd been solid all tournament, suddenly couldn't make basic passes or track runners. The gap between Brazil's midfield and defense became so large you could have parked a bus in it. Luiz Felipe Scolari had been managing at the highest level for decades. He'd won a World Cup with this same Brazil team in 2002. He wasn't some novice who panicked under pressure. Yet his team fell apart so completely that German players later admitted they felt sorry for Brazil and deliberately held back from scoring more goals. The psychological collapse was the most mysterious part. Professional footballers are trained to handle pressure and adversity. They've all been in difficult situations before. But Brazil's players looked like they were in shock, frozen by what was happening around them. Some were visibly crying during the match. Fred, Brazil's striker, literally stopped trying. Statistical analysis showed he failed to make a single tackle, cross, run, or interception during the entire match. He spent most of his time standing on the center circle, waiting for kickoffs after German goals. A World Cup striker basically gave up in a semi-final. The crowd reaction added another layer of weirdness. Brazilian fans started leaving after Germany's fourth goal. Those who stayed began ironically cheering German passes and applauding German goals. Imagine Manchester United fans cheering Manchester City goals at Old Trafford. That's the level of betrayal we witnessed. Brazil had lost Neymar to injury and Thiago Silva to suspension, but teams lose key players all the time without completely imploding. Dante and Bernard stepped in as replacements. They weren't world beaters, but they weren't Sunday League players either. The absence of 2 players doesn't explain 11 players forgetting how to play football. The German players' reaction was telling too. They stopped celebrating goals properly because they felt embarrassed by how one-sided it was becoming. Mats Hummels later revealed that Germany made a conscious decision at halftime not to humiliate Brazil further. When has that ever happened in a World Cup semi-final? Brazil's defensive stats from that match are impossible to comprehend. They allowed Germany 14 shots, 10 on target. Their passing accuracy dropped to levels you'd see in amateur games. They made basic errors that youth team coaches would criticize. Professional defenders don't usually forget how to defend in the space of 18 minutes. The home advantage factor makes it even more mysterious. Playing at home usually gives teams extra motivation and energy. The Mineirão Stadium was packed with passionate Brazilian supporters ready to roar their team to the final. Instead, that crowd became Brazil's executioner, turning on their own players in the most brutal fashion imaginable. What about Germany's performance? They were clinical and efficient. but they weren't playing at some superhuman level. Their goals came from relatively simple moves that any decent team should defend against. Brazil wasn't being picked apart by intricate passing combinations, BSB-SA. They were conceding from basic attacks. The aftermath revealed how deep the psychological damage went. Brazil lost 3-0 to Netherlands in the third-place playoff, conceding 14 goals across 2 matches. Players were in tears, some retired from international football immediately, and Coach Scolari resigned, calling it the worst day of my life. Medical experts have suggested that extreme pressure can cause athletes to experience something similar to panic attacks, where basic motor skills and decision-making abilities become severely impaired. But that usually affects individuals, not entire teams, simultaneously. Some Brazilian journalists floated conspiracy theories about match fixing, but that's nonsense. You can't fake the genuine devastation on Brazilian players' faces or the organic crowd reaction. Plus, Brazil was one of the pre-tournament favorites. There was no financial incentive to throw the match. The mystery deepens when you consider this was Brazil's second consecutive home defeat. They lost to Netherlands 3 days later, meaning they suffered back-to-back losses on home soil for the first time since 1940. What are the odds of that happening by coincidence during a World Cup? Former players and pundits have tried to explain it through tactical analysis, but tactics don't account for world-class players making amateur mistakes. Something else was happening that night in Belo Horizonte, something that goes beyond normal football explanations. Maybe it was the perfect storm of pressure, missing key players, and facing a German team that peaked at exactly the right moment. Maybe some collapses in sport are just unexplainable freak events that happen once in a lifetime. Or maybe there are psychological and physiological factors we don't fully understand about how elite athletes respond to extreme stress in high-stakes situations. What we know for certain is that 200 million Brazilians watched their football dreams die in 18 minutes, and nobody, not the players, not the coaches, not the experts, can fully explain how it happened. Brazil's collapse showed how a whole team can fall apart, and now we'll be moving on to the next unanswered question: the sudden death of Cheick Tiote in Beijing. What killed a perfectly healthy 30-year-old professional athlete in the middle of a routine training session? Cheick Tiote collapsed during practice with Beijing Enterprises on the 5th of June 2017. 1 minute he was training normally, the next minute he was on the ground. The club rushed him to hospital, but he was pronounced dead just 1 hour later. The official cause? Heart attack. But that explanation is complete fake when you look at the details. Tiote wasn't some out-of-shape veteran coasting through his final years. He was known for his incredible fitness levels at Newcastle. His former teammates described him as someone who covered every blade of grass on the field and was flat out every day in training. This was a player who built his career on never-ending energy and physical intensity. So, how does someone like that just drop dead at 30? The answer is, they don't. Not without something seriously wrong happening. The timing stinks. Tiote was observing Ramadan, which means he was fasting during daylight hours. Training in Beijing's summer heat while not eating or drinking all day puts enormous stress on the body. But millions of Muslim athletes fast during Ramadan without dying, so that can't be the whole story, unless someone was pushing him way too hard while he was in a vulnerable state. His family flew to China hoping to get answers, but they left with nothing. No clear medical explanation, no detailed autopsy results, no investigation into whether the training conditions were safe. Chinese authorities seemed more interested in making the story disappear than finding out what actually happened. That's not normal behavior when a high-profile athlete dies. The club's statement was bizarrely clinical. The player suddenly fainted during routine training and efforts to save him failed. That's it. No mention of what might have caused a healthy professional athlete to suddenly collapse. No discussion of whether proper medical protocols were followed. Just corporate speak designed to avoid responsibility. Beijing Enterprises was a second-tier Chinese club desperate to make their mark. They'd signed Tiote as their marquee foreign player, someone to help them get promoted and gain credibility. These clubs often cut corners on medical facilities and safety protocols to save money. Did their desperation to succeed put players at risk? I'd bet money it did. The Chinese league was booming in 2017, throwing massive money at international stars. But behind the flashy signings, there were persistent rumors about substandard training facilities, inadequate medical care, and players being pushed beyond safe limits. Tiote might have been a victim of this reckless expansion where profit mattered more than player safety. His agent flew to Beijing to help with arrangements, but even he couldn't get proper answers about what happened. Think about that. For a player's representative, Sel Gauda, someone whose job is to protect their client's interests, to leave China without understanding how his player died suggests a serious cover-up. Agents know how to ask the right questions and demand answers. If he came back empty-handed, someone was deliberately stonewalling. The lack of transparency was stunning. In Europe or America, the sudden death of a high-profile athlete during training would trigger investigations, medical reviews, and detailed public reports. In China, Tiote's death was treated like an unfortunate accident that everyone wanted to forget quickly. That's not how you handle the death of a public figure unless you're hiding something. His former Newcastle teammates were devastated but also confused. These were players who'd trained alongside Tiote for years, who knew his physical condition better than anyone. None of them could understand how someone so fit could just collapse and die. When professional athletes who know the person's fitness level are shocked by a sudden death, that tells you something's very wrong. The heart attack explanation never made sense medically. Young athletes who suffer cardiac arrest during exercise usually have underlying conditions like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or electrical heart problems. But Tiote had passed medical examinations throughout his career with no red flags. How did multiple doctors miss a heart condition serious enough to kill him? Answer: they probably didn't, because there probably wasn't one. Was it the heat, the fasting, the stress of adapting to a new country and club, or something else entirely? Maybe the training was dangerously intense. Maybe the medical facilities weren't equipped to handle emergencies. Maybe there were performance-enhancing substances involved that nobody wants to talk about. The Chinese authorities made sure we'd never know by shutting down any real investigation. His wife was pregnant with their third child when he died. She was expecting their baby that same week, which means Tiote missed the birth of his child by days. The cruel timing makes his death even more heartbreaking, but it also raises questions about the emotional and financial stress he was under. Moving to China alone, away from family support, with a new baby coming, that's enormous pressure on top of professional demands. The mystery deepens when you consider how many other players have died unexpectedly in similar circumstances. Sudden cardiac death in young athletes isn't unheard of, but the pattern of healthy players collapsing during training in certain leagues suggests environmental or institutional factors that aren't being addressed. It's almost like some clubs or leagues create conditions where these tragedies become more likely. Beijing Enterprises folded shortly after Tiote's death. The club that had been desperate enough to sign international players suddenly couldn't continue operations. Whether this was connected to his death or just coincidence, we'll never know because no one investigated the connection. But clubs don't usually collapse right after signing marquee players unless something catastrophic happened to their reputation or finances. The Chinese Football Association's handling of the incident was pathetic. No public investigation, no changes to training protocols, no review of medical standards, just silence and hope that people would move on. That's not the behavior of an organization that cares about player safety. Our consolation. That's the behavior of an organization trying to avoid liability. 7 years later, his family still doesn't have real answers about what killed him. They know he collapsed during training and died in hospital, but they don't know why a healthy 30-year-old professional athlete's heart just stopped working. That's not acceptable in 2024, when medical science can explain almost every cause of sudden death. The truth is probably ugly. Maybe it was negligent training practices. Maybe it was inadequate medical care. Maybe it was performance-enhancing drugs gone wrong. Maybe it was a combination of factors that the club and league knew were dangerous but ignored for profit. Whatever it was, powerful people decided it was easier to bury the truth than face the consequences. Tiote's death should have been a wake-up call for player safety in football. Instead, it became another cautionary tale about what happens when money matters more than human life. The fact that his family still doesn't know what killed him 7 years later is a disgrace that reflects badly on everyone involved. The truth about what happened to Chik Tiote died with him in that Beijing hospital. Whether it was negligence, cover-up, or just a tragic medical mystery, we'll probably never know. But the lack of transparency and investigation suggests there was more to his death than anyone was willing to admit. And that should terrify every player thinking about chasing money in leagues that prioritize profit over people.